Joining us to talk about all of this is Dana Bai. She's the campaign director for Tax March, which is an accountability and fairness, not only for the tax code, but also for the economy in general. Dana, thanks for joining us.
Thanks so much for having me, David.
First of all, what do you make of the Biden administration to essentially raise the corporate tax rate from 21% to 28% to make people who are making more than $500,000 pay more as a way of trying to pay for this infrastructure package?
I think it's a great policy, and I was incredibly impressed last week when President Biden used his address to Congress to really double down on the reason for corporations and the very rich to start paying their fair share in this economy. His line about trickle-down economics not working has never worked. It's totally spot on for this moment, and it's time for us to use this, Democrat trifecta to make sure that we are having corporations and the super rich who have gained so much over the last 40 years really start paying their fair share.
And your organization is using this moment essentially with a campaign, a series of ads targeting certain companies, Nike and Federal Express, who currently essentially pay nothing. I want to run the ad and then get your reaction and talk about it on the other side. Here's the Tax March ad related to Federal Express. Watch.
During the pandemic, FedEx shipped more packages than ever before, raking in $1.2 billion in profits. So how much did FedEx pay in federal taxes? Nothing.
Nothing?
Nothing. Just like all these other massive corporations, they paid nothing in federal taxes this year, and they're doing everything possible to keep it that way. That's why tax-avoiding corporations like FedEx are lobbying against President Biden's plan to rebuild America. President Biden's plan will make corporations pay their fair share so we can invest in roads, bridges, schools, high-speed internet, creating millions of good jobs. But for FedEx, paying nothing in federal taxes matters more than investing in us. Tell Congress it's time to put the people first and make corporations like FedEx pay their fair share.
Dana, that's an effective ad. Tell me about who the audience is. Is it not only people out there, but the sort of normal citizens, but is it also members of Congress in this case?
Absolutely. We want to make sure that the public understands that while they are likely paying their fair share, companies like FedEx, which is a household name and clearly has made a lot of money during the pandemic, just isn't. And so we have targeted folks, viewers in Memphis, where FedEx is headquartered, to see this ad, but then also around Capitol Hill to remind lawmakers that they shouldn't let corporate tax dodging corporations like FedEx really drive the debate around tax fairness and making investments in our economy.
I think I read that something like 25 out of the 50 largest corporations in the United States paid no taxes, no income taxes last year or the year before. Why target specifically Federal Express and Nike?
So I think with both Federal Express and Nike, they're household names. And I think it's actually 55 of the biggest corporations paid zero in federal income taxes last year. And so when you look at a corporation like FedEx, they raked in the most profits than any year prior and still paid nothing. And actually, if you look back to where their advocacy efforts were going back in 2017, when Congress was debating Trump's tax plan, the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act, they lobbied incredibly hard to get that corporate tax rate down. And when they did, they stopped paying federal income taxes, even though they had been before. And so that is just a classic scenario, I think, of corporations leveraging their power and influence to ultimately get out of paying what the rest of us all do, which is taxes.
When Barack Obama proposed lowering the corporate tax rate from 35% to bring it down, Joe Manchin, the senator from West Virginia, said he was fine if it was at 28%. Well, fast forward, Trump administration lowers the tax rate to 21. Now Joe Biden's saying, okay, well, let's bring it back up to 28%. And suddenly Joe Manchin's like, nah, that's too high. What do you make of Joe Manchin, Kristen Sinema, the Democrat from Arizona, and sort of their role in all of this and what they've been saying about it?
It's a great question. And I think one of the things the advice that I would give to Senators Manchin and Sinema and others others in the Democratic caucus who are maybe a little wary to talk about taxes is to not be scared. One of the things that we have seen year after year, especially in the wake of the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act, is that taxing the rich and corporations so that they pay their fair share like the rest of us do is incredibly popular, but also unifying across party lines. When I look at that 28% number, honestly, it is already a compromise from where we were back at 35% prior to the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act. And so really going any lower is just arguing against ourselves. And so that 25% is a bit too low. And I really think that Democrats should be united around Biden's plan and make sure that we're maintaining that floor and not just making 28% the ceiling.
Is there anything that maybe we're missing in this debate in terms of keeping it focused on the corporate tax rate or making wealthy people pay more? I mean, there have been some creative scenarios introduced in Congress whereby you require corporations to spend a certain amount of their revenue on investment, on employee wages, those sort of things, and give them a threshold as opposed to taking away and essentially taking away the argument from simply charging them more in taxes.
I think there's a lot of things that the government can do to make sure that corporations are actually being responsible public actors and not just signing press statements that say that they value democracy and think that and saying that they believe in economic fairness. It's one thing to sign a statement, but it's another thing to actually put your money and put your voice publicly in towards Congress for those efforts, and making sure that the way in which they're viewing their own profits really thinks first about the workers and not just about the corporate CEOs at the top getting richer and richer.
Your organization spends a lot of time talking about wealth inequality. What do you see as being the biggest driver right now of wealth inequality, and something that perhaps could be changed to try to narrow the gap once more?
I mean, one of the biggest drivers is our tax code, to be perfectly frank. We have dropped the corporate tax rate. We have dropped the top marginal tax rate, and their tax rates have just been coming down and down and down over the last 4 decades under this false idea that if you give tax breaks to the rich, somehow that extra money will just flow down to the rest of us. And that hasn't borne out. The wealth gap between the richest and the poorest is wider today than it hasn't been as wide as it is today since immediately before the Great Depression. And I think what we saw during the pandemic is that while millions of Americans slipped into poverty, we had over 650 billionaires add more than $1 trillion to their wealth. That is something that is unimaginable in a lot of ways to me. And I think those are some numbers that I always come back to when I'm out talking to our organizers and talking to just regular folks about why the tax code and the role that it plays in income inequality is something that has to be tackled, and it really needs to be tackled now.
What's your assessment of the political landscape in Washington now in terms of tackling it? Where are the votes and where are the key battles going to be?
Absolutely. As I mentioned, taxing the rich and corporations is an issue that we have seen pull well time and time again. We have been with Tax March, we have been in the field a number of times over the last few years and seen the same results, that a majority of Americans want the rich and corporations to pay their fair share. And so I think really what that comes down to is making sure that lawmakers who feel like they're more on the Democratic side, who feel like they're more middle of the road and maybe a little afraid to talk about taxes, they should take some comfort that this is a unifying thing. One of the fact that President Biden used so much of his address to Congress last week to talk about how many corporations avoided taxes, how much money billionaires have added to their wealth, should be a clear indication that the narrative around taxes in this country has changed. And Democrats have a moment right now to build upon that narrative.
At what point does an organization like yours, instead of running ads just say against Nike and Federal Express, start to run ads against a Joe Manchin, or in West Virginia, encouraging Joe Manchin to do the right thing? In other words, putting some pressure on him, or is that too dangerous politically at this stage?
I think there's a lot of conversations that need to be had with folks in West Virginia, and making sure that there are, advocates who I suspect that Senator Manchin trusts, who can talk directly with him about why they think the corporate tax rate, the individual tax rate should be shared. I think right now these corporate actors have a lot of lobbying power in Congress through groups like the Business Roundtable and the U.S. Chamber of Congress, and being sure to hold them accountable, especially corporations like Nike that claim to have these progressive credentials, is going to be really important to the debate right now, and as we get into further conversations about this rate.
I'm just curious, have you heard anything back from Nike or Federal Express, even indirectly in response to your ad campaign?
FedEx had some choice words in their local paper about avoiding corporate taxes, not directly about our ad, but there was a story that talked about how their CEO, who's one of those billionaires who added wealth during the pandemic, definitely thinks the corporate tax rate should not go up. And Nike has also said some things since the original ITEP report about those 55 tax avoiding corporations came out, saying, "Oh, but we do pay our taxes, but you're not paying your federal income taxes." So I think we're hitting definitely a sensitive spot, and we're gonna keep going for it.
Well, it's good that you're being noticed. It's a $500,000 ad buy. Coming perhaps to a TV station or perhaps social media near you. Dana Bai, she's a campaign director with Tax March. Dana, thanks for joining us. I appreciate it.
Absolutely, thanks so much.
Thanks for watching The Young Turks, really appreciate it. Another way to show support is through YouTube memberships. You'll get to interact with us more. There's live chat emojis, badges. You've got emojis of me, Anna, John, JR, so those are super fun. But you also get playback of our exclusive member-only shows and specials right after they air. So all of that, all you gotta do is click that join button right underneath the video. Thank you.